Mr. Brisher's Treasure of 12 Stories and a Dream by H.G. Wells. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Will Cooper. Mr. Brisher's Treasure. "You can't be too careful who you marry," said Mr. Brisher, and pulled thoughtfully with a fat-wristed hand at the lank moustache that hides his want of chin. "That's why," I ventured. "Yes," said Mr. Brisher, with a solemn light in his bleary, blue-grey eyes, moving his head expressively and breathing alcohol intimately at me. "There's lots as have had try at me, as many as I could name in this town, but none have done it. None." I surveyed the flushed countenance, the equatorial expansion, the masterly carelessness of his attire, and heaved a sigh to think that by reason of the unworthiness of women he must needs be the last of his race. "I was a smart young chap when I was younger," said Mr. Brisher. "I had my work cut out, but I was very careful, very, and I got through." He leant over the tap-room table and thought visibly on the subject of my trustworthiness. I was relieved, at last, by his confidence. "I was engaged once," he said at last, with a reminiscent eye on the shove-a-penny board. "So near as that?" He looked at me. "So near as that. Fact is—" He looked about him, brought his face close to mine, lowered his voice, and fenced off an unsympathetic world with a grimy hand. "If she ain't dead or married to someone else or anything, I'm engaged still. Now." He confirmed this statement with nods and facial contortions. "Still," he said, ending the pantomime, and broke into a reckless smile at my surprise. "Me!" "Run away," he explained further, with coruscating eyebrows. "Come home. That ain't all. You'd hardly believe it," he said, "but I found a treasure. Found a regular treasure." I fancied this was irony, and did not, perhaps, greet it with proper surprise. "Yes," he said, "I found a treasure, and come home. I tell you I could surprise you with things that has happened to me." And for some time he was content to repeat that he had found a treasure, and left it. I made no vulgar clamour for a story, but I became attentive to Mr. Brisher's bodily needs, and presently I led him back to the deserted lady. "She was a nice girl," he said, a little sadly, I thought, "and respectable." He raised his eyebrows and tightened his mouth to express extreme respectability, beyond the likes of us elderly men. "It was a long way from here, Essex, in fact, near Colchester. It was when I was up in London in the building trade. I was a smart young chap then, I can tell you. Slim, had best clothes, as good as anybody. Had silk hat, mind you." Mr. Brisher's hand shot above his head toward the infinite to indicate its silk hat of the highest. "Umbrella nice, umbrella with an horn handle. Savins, very careful I was." He was pensive for a little while, thinking, as we must all come to think sooner or later, of the vanished brightness of youth, but he refrained, as one may do in tap-rooms, from the obvious moral. "I got to know her through a chap that was engaged to her sister. She was stopping in London for a bit with an aunt that had an ham and beef shop. This aunt was very particular. They was all very particular people, all her people was, and wouldn't let her sister go out with this feller, except her other sister. My girl, that is, went with them. So he brought me into it, sort of to ease the crowding. We used to go walks in Battersea Park of a Sunday afternoon, me and my topper, and him in his, and all the girls well stylish. There wasn't many in Battersea Park had the laugh of us. She wasn't what you'd call pretty, but a nicer girl I never met. I liked her from the start, and, well though I say it, who shouldn't? She liked me. You know how it is, I dessay." I pretended I did. "And when this chap married her sister, him and me was great friends. What must he do but ask me down to Colchester, close by where she lived? Naturally I was introduced to her people, and, well, very soon her and me was engaged." He repeated, "Engaged." "She lived at home with her father and mother, quite the lady, in a very nice little house with a garden, and remarkable respectable people they was. Rich you might call 'em a'most. They owned their own house, got it out of the building society, and cheap because the chap who had it before was a burglar and in prison, and they had a bit of freehold land, and some cottages and money, invested all nice and tight. They was what you'd call snug and warm. I tell you I was on. Furniture too. Why, they had a piano. Jane, her name was Jane, used to play it Sundays, and very nice she played too. There wasn't hardly a hymn tune in the book she couldn't play. Many's the evening we've met and sung hymns there, me and her and the family. Her father was quite a leading man in chapel. You should have seen him Sundays, interrupting the minister and giving out hymns. He had gold spectacles, I remember, and used to look over 'em at you while he sang hearty. He was always great on singing hearty to the Lord, and when he got out of tune, half the people went after him, always. He was that sort of man, and to walk behind him in his nice black clothes, his hat was a brimmer, made one regular proud to be engaged to such a father-in-law. and when the summer came I went down there and stopped a fortnight. Now you know there was a sort of itch, said Mr. Brisher. We wanted to marry, me and Jane did, and get things settled, but he said I had to get a proper position first. Consequently, there was a hitch. Consequently, when I went down there, I was anxious to show that I was a good useful sort of chap like. Show I could do pretty nearly everything like. See? I made a sympathetic noise. And down at the bottom of their garden was a bit of wild part like. So I says to him, why don't you have a rockery here? I says, it'd look nice. Too much expense, he says. Not a penny, says I. I'm a dab at rockeries. Let me make you one. You see, I'd helped my brother make a rockery in the beer garden behind his tap, so I knew how to do it right. Let me make you one, I says. It's holidays, but I'm that sort of chap. I hate doing nothing, I says. I'll make you one to rights. And the long and the short of it was, he said I might. And that's how I come on the treasure. What treasure? I asked. Why, said Mr. Brisher, the treasure I'm telling you about. What's the reason why I never married? What? A treasure dug up? Yes, buried wealth treasure trove, come out of the ground, where I kept on saying, regular treasure. He looked at me with unusual disrespect. It wasn't more than a foot deep, not the top of it, he said. I'd hardly got thirsty like before I come on the corner. Go on, I said. I didn't understand. Why, directly I hit the box, I knew it was treasure. A sort of instinct told me. Something seemed to shout inside of me, now's your chance, lie low. It's lucky I knew the laws of treasure trove, or I'd have been shouting there and then, I dare say you know. Crown bags it, I said. All but 1%. Go on, it's a shame. What did you do? Uncovered the top of the box. There wasn't anybody in the garden or about like. Jane was helping her mother do the house. I was excited, I tell you. I tried the lock and then gave it a whack at the hinges. Open it came. Silver coins, full, shining. It made me tremble to see 'em. And just then, I'm blessed if the dustman didn't come round the back of the house. Pretty nearly gave me heart disease. Think what a fool I was to have all that money showing. And directly after I heard the chap next door, he was holidaying too. I heard him watering his beans. If only he'd looked over the fence. What did you do? Kicked the lid on again and covered it up like a shot, and went on digging about a yard away from it like mad. And my face, so to speak, was laughing on its own account till I had it hid. I tell you, I was regular scared like at my luck. I just thought that it had to be kept close, and that was all. Treasure, I kept whispering to myself. Treasure, and hundreds of pounds. Hundreds of pounds. Whispering to myself like, and digging like blazes. It seemed to me that box was regular sticking out and showing, like your legs do under the sheets in bed. And I went and put all the earth I got out of my hole for the rockery slap on top of it. I was in a sweat. And in the midst of it all, out toddles her father. He didn't say anything to me, just stood behind me and stirred. But Jane told me afterwards when he went indoors. He says, that there jackanapes of yours, Jane, he always called me a jackanapes somehow, knows how to put his back into it after all. Seemed quite impressed by it, he did. How long was the box? I asked suddenly. How long? Said Mr. Brisher. Yes, in length. Oh, about so by so. Mr. Brisher indicated a moderate-sized trunk. Full, said I. Full up of silver coins, half-crowns, I believe. Why, I cried, that would mean hundreds of pounds. Thousands, said Mr. Brisher, in a sort of sad calm. I calculated it out. But how did it get there? All I know is where I found. What I thought at the time was this. The chap who'd owned the house before her father had been a regular slap-up burglar. What you'd call high-class criminal. Used to drive his trap like Peace did. Mr. Brisher meditated on the difficulties of narration, and embarked on a complicated parenthesis. I don't know if I told you it had been a burglar's house before it was my girl's father's, and I knew he'd robbed a mail train once. I did know that. It seemed to me. That's very likely, I said. But what did you do? Sweated, said Mr. Brisher. Regular run off me, all that morning, said Mr. Brisher. I was at it, pretending to make that rockery and wondering what I should do. I'd have told her father, perhaps, only I was doubtful of his honesty. I was afraid he might rob me of it like, and give it up to the authorities. And besides, considering I was marrying into the family, I thought it would be nicer like if it came through me. Put me on a better footing, so to speak. Well, I'd had 3 days before me left on my holidays, so there wasn't no hurry. So I covered it up, and went on digging, and tried to puzzle out how I was to make sure of it. Only I couldn't. I thought, said Mr. Brisher, and I thought. Once I got regular doubtful whether I'd seen it or not, and I went down to it, and had it uncovered again, just as her ma came out to hang up a bit of washing she'd done. Jumps again. Afterwards I was just thinking I'd have another go at it, when Jane comes to tell me dinner was ready. You'll want it, she says, seeing all the hole you've dug. I was in a regular daze all dinner, wondering whether that chap next door wasn't over the fence and filling his pockets. But in the afternoon I got easier in my mind. It seemed to me it must have been there so long it was pretty sure to stop a bit longer, and I tried to get up a bit of discussion to draw out the old man and see what he thought of treasure trove. Mr. Brisher paused and affected amusement at the memory. "The old man was a scorcher," he said. "A regular scorcher." "What?" said I. "Did he?" "It was like this," explained Mr. Brisher, laying a friendly hand on my arm and breathing into my face to calm me. "Just to draw him out, I told a story of a chap I said I knew, pretending you know who'd found a sovereign in an overcoat he'd borrowed. I said he stuck to it, but I said I wasn't sure whether that was right or not, and then the old man began. Lor, he did let me have it." Mr. Brisher affected an insincere amusement. "He was, well, what you might call a rare hand at snacks. Said that was the sort of friend he'd naturally expect me to have. Said he'd naturally expect that from the friend of an out-of-work loafer who took up with daughters who didn't belong to him. There, I couldn't tell you half he said. He went on most outrageous. I stood up to him about it, just to draw him out. 'Wouldn't you stick to a half sov? Not if you found it in the street,' I says. 'Certainly not,' he says. 'Certainly I wouldn't.' 'What? Not if you found it as a sort of treasure?' 'Young man, there's higher authority than mine. Render unto Caesar. What is it?' 'Yes, well, he fetched up that. A rare hand at hitting you over the head with the Bible was the old man.' And so he went on. He got to such snacks about me last I couldn't stand it. I'd promised Jane not to answer him back, but it got a bit too thick. I give it him." Mr. Brisher, by means of enigmatical facework, tried to make me think he had the best of that argument, but I knew better. "I went out in a huff at last, but not before I was pretty sure I had to lift that treasure by myself. The only thing that kept me was thinking how I'd take it out of him when I had the cash." There was a lengthy pause. "Now you'd hardly believe it, but all them 3 days I never had a chance at the blessed treasure. Never got out not even a half-crown. There was always something, always." "Astonishing thing it isn't thought of more," said Mr. Brisher. "Finding treasure's no great shakes. It's getting it. I don't suppose I slept a wink any of those nights, thinking where I was to take it, what I was to do with it, how I was to explain it. It made me regular ill. And days I was that dull it made Jane regular huffy. 'You ain't the same old chap you was in London,' she says several times. I tries to lay it on her father and his snacks, but bless you, she knew better. What must she have that I'd got another girl on my mind? Said I wasn't true. Well, we had a bit of a row, but I was that set on the treasure I didn't seem to mind a bit, anything she said. Well, at last I got a sort of plan. I was always a bit good at planning, though carrying it out isn't so much in my line. I thought it all out and settled on a plan. First I was going to take all my pockets full of these here half-crowns, see, and afterwards, as I shall tell. Well, I got to that state I couldn't think of getting at the treasure again in the daytime, so I waited until the night before I had to go, and then, when everything was still, up I gets and slips down to the back door, meaning to get my pockets full. What must I do in the scullery but fall over a pail? Up gets her father with a gun. He was a light sleeper, was her father, and very suspicious, and there was me. Had to explain I'd come down to the pump for a drink because my water bottle was bad. He didn't lift me off a snack or two over that bit, you'll hear, Bob. "And you mean to say—" I began. "Wait a bit," said Mr. Brisher. "I say I'd made my plan. That put the kibosh on one bit, but it didn't hurt the general scheme, not a bit. I went and I finished that rockery the next day, as though there wasn't a snack in the world, cemented over the stones I did, dabbed it green and everything. I put a dab of green just to show where the box was. They all came and looked at it, and said how nice it was. Even he was a bit soft to like to see it, and all he said was, 'It's a pity you can't always work like that, then you might get something definite to do,' he says. 'Yes,' I says, 'I couldn't help it. I put a lot in that rockery,' I says, 'like that. See, I put a lot in that rockery,' meaning, 'I see,' said I, for Mr. Brisher is apt to over-elaborate his jokes. 'He didn't,' said Mr. Brisher. 'Not then, anyhow. However, after all that was over, off I set for London. Off I set for London." Pause. "Only I wasn't going to no London," said Mr. Brisher with sudden animation and thrusting his face into mine. "No fear. What do you think? I didn't go no further than Colchester, nor a yard. I'd left the spade just where I could find it. I'd got everything planned and right. I hired a little trap in Colchester and pretended I wanted to go to Ipswich and stop the night and come back the next day, and the chap I hired it from made me leave 2 sovereigns on it right away, and off I set. I didn't go to no Ipswich neither. Midnight the horse and trap was hitched by the little road that ran by the cottage where he lived, not 60 yards off it wasn't, and I was at it like a good 'un. It was just the night for such games, overcast but a trifle too hot, and all round the sky there was summer lightning, and presently a thunderstorm. Down it came, first big drops in a sort of fizzle, then hail. I kept on. I whacked at it. I didn't dream the old man would hear. I didn't even trouble to go quiet with the spade, and the thunder and lightning and hail seemed to excite me like. I shouldn't wonder if I was singing. I got so hard at it I clean forgot the thunder and the horse and trap. I precious soon got the box showing and started to lift it. Heavy? I said. I couldn't no more lift it than fly. I was sick. I'd never thought of that I got regular wild. I tell you, I cursed. I got sort of outrageous. I didn't think of dividing it like for the minute, and even then I couldn't have took the money out loose in a trap. I hoisted one end sort of wild like, and over the whole show went with a tremendous noise, perfect smash of silver, and then right on the heels of that, flash, lightning like the day, and there was the back door open and the old man coming down the garden with his blooming old gun. He wasn't not 100 yards away. I tell you, I was that upset I didn't think what I was doing. I never stopped, not even to fill my pockets. I went over the fence like a shot and ran like 1 o'clock for the trap, cussing and swearing as I went. I was in a state. And will you believe me, when I got to the place where I'd left the horse and trap, they'd gone. Orf! When I saw that, I hadn't a cuss left for it. I just danced on the grass, and when I'd danced enough, I started off to London. I was done. Mr. Brisher was pensive for an interval. I was done, he repeated very bitterly. Well, I said. That's all, said Mr. Brisher. You didn't go back? No fear. I'd had enough of that blooming treasure, anyhow, for a bit. Besides, I didn't know what was done to chaps who tried to collar a treasure trove. I started off for London there and then. And you never went back? Never. But about Jane, did you write? 3 times, fishing like, and no answer. We parted in a bit of a huff on account of her being jealous, so that I couldn't make out for certain what it meant. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know whether the old man knew it was me. I sort of kept an eye open on papers to see when he'd given up that treasure to the Crown, as I hadn't a doubt he would, considering how respectable he'd always been. And did he? Mr. Brisher pursed his mouth and moved his head slowly from side to side. Not him, he said. Jane was a nice girl, he said. A thorough nice girl, mind you, if jealous, and there's no knowing I mightn't have gone back to her after a bit. I thought if he didn't give up the treasure I might have sort of an hold on him. Well, one day I looks as usual under Colchester, and there I saw his name. What for, do you think? I could not guess. Mr. Brisher's voice sank to a whisper, and once more he spoke behind his hand. His manner was suddenly suffused with a positive joy. Issuing counterfeit coins, he said. Counterfeit coins? You don't mean to say... Yes, it. Bad. Quite a long case they've made of it. But they got him, though he dodged tremendous. Traced his having passed, nearly a dozen bad half-crowns. And you didn't? No fear. And it didn't do him much good to say it was a treasure trove. End of Mr. Brisher's treasure.